Hey, Jeremy. Good to see you. It's been a while. Let's see. I've got your A1C results here. Oh, hey. Steve just texted. He's invited us to dinner tonight. You want to go with?
Sure. Where are we going?
Looks like Spaghetti Factory.
Thank you for calling CVS Pharmacy.
Oh, man, I am super low. Time for some glucose tabs. What? I ate them all? Oh, man. Oh, Skittles. Thank God. Oh, not you too, Skittles. Oh, a Pepsi. Yes. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. And enough with the song already. I get it. I'm under pressure with diabetes. It's cute. But I can't be the only one, am I?
Jeremy, you are not the only one. In fact, we know lots of people feel just the same way. People both with type 1 diabetes like you and people with type 2 diabetes as well. I mean, think about it. Does this sound like you? Do you ever go through times where you just feel stressed out about living every day with type 2 diabetes? Do you feel like, oh gosh, you should be doing better? Are you worried that your numbers just aren't better no matter what you do? Maybe you're frustrated that you just can't manage your weight despite your best effort. Or maybe you're concerned that you're feeling like hassled or judged by other people in your life. If any of that sounds familiar, that's the sort of things we want to talk about today. Now, first, let's get some perspective here. Many people with diabetes go through times where they feel just this way. This is completely normal. The good news is, and the reason I get to talk with you today is because all of this is fixable. You can manage diabetes successfully and not have to feel so pressured. You could feel just like this guy to be able to say, I've got this. And that's what we're going to focus on. Now, first, some congratulations are in order. Because if you are feeling under pressure, that's actually in some ways a good thing. Because the people with diabetes who we really worry about are those people who feel no pressure at all. And there's really two groups of those people I just want to mention. Because even though it's probably not you, you may know some of these people. One are people we call delay discounters. And delay discounters are people who are pretty concerned about what's happening right now in the current moment, but they're less worried about what's happening in the future. And to some degree, all human beings are like this. We tend to think more about, is this good or bad for me? And not worried about, is this going to be harmful to me? Like, oh, might I develop long-term complications in the future? And that's why this particular image and this statement under it is so critical and so normal, because so many people feel this way. Now, we also know another critical issue is what we call people who believe in the Dunning-Kruger phenomena. These are followers. And here's an example of a follower. So a typical standard person who says something like this: hey, you know what? I plan to start paying attention to my diabetes if and when something terrible happens. But so far, I feel fine. So I'm just going to keep ignoring it. Hey, no worries. Now, what is this Dunning-Kruger effect, and why is this so perfect? Well, it comes from an important professor. This is Dr. Dunning and his colleague, Kruger. And by definition, the Dunning-Kruger phenomenon is this: a cognitive bias in which a relatively unskilled person suffers what we call illusory superiority, failing to recognize their own ineptitude and evaluate their own ability accurately. Now, that's a very fancy way of saying something way simpler, which is simply this: the uninformed are often too uninformed to even realize that they're uninformed. So I'm pretty sure if you're listening to me right now and watching me right now, you probably don't fall into either of these groups, not a Dunning-Kruger follower nor a delay discounter. You're feeling some pressure about worrying about your diabetes and how you're managing it. And again, congratulations, that's kind of a good thing. But let's get to work and do something about this, because there's no reason this has to keep going on. So let's set the stage by talking about real life with diabetes. We know that if you're living with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, it can be tough. It doesn't have to be, but for lots and lots of folks, it's tough. And one of the reasons it can be tough is because it's a job, right? It is a time-consuming job. I mean, you didn't volunteer to have diabetes. there's work to do every day. There's no pay, there's no vacations, and you get to do it, forever. So it's understandable why this could wear you down. And when we think about the job of diabetes, really, is it a lot of work? Well, some of our colleagues recently did a lovely, lovely article where they said, let's just make a list of all the stuff that people with chronic healthcare conditions like diabetes have to now think about, actions they have to take, things they have to do, things they have to plan for. And they put it together in a single lovely figure in this article that they published. And I want to show it to you now because it summarizes really the job of someone with a chronic healthcare condition with diabetes. And the stuff they have to do is this. So I hope you're going to read all this carefully. Just kidding, of course. This is unreadable. The font is so small you can't even read it when you look at the publication. But it's to highlight something that I bet many of you feel, that pressure, that, oh my goodness, there's so much I should be thinking about and worrying about. And when you begin to really feel that way and to feel that sense of being overwhelmed and that sense of pressure, it's easy to feel like it's just too much and feel like giving up. So as we begin to think about what to do about it, let's try to identify what some of the critical sources of that pressure really are for people with type 2 diabetes. Now there's lots of them, but I want to focus on what is typically the top 3, just 3. Number 1 is this, fear. There's all sorts of reasons to be freaked out and scared about life with type 2 diabetes. You might be worried about hypoglycemia or low blood glucose. Am I safe? Am I going to be okay? Can I drive my car? Can I be out in public? Am I going to embarrass myself? Is something scary going to happen? Can I sleep well at night? The concerns about hypoglycemia, low blood glucose, are unfortunately very common, but fixable. We know many people are fearful about injections, fearful like, oh my goodness, what if I end up on insulin someday? And about 1/3 of people with type 2 diabetes in the United States end up on insulin. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't mean anything bad, but we know it's a source of fear for many folks. And also for folks, there's a sense of loss of freedom. Like, oh, I'm living with type 2 diabetes, if I manage it well, I'm going to have to live in a box. But again, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to happen. And again, one of the scariest things about type 2 diabetes that people report, and it's understandable, is what's going to happen to me. So they'll say things like this, oh my goodness, I feel like diabetes is going to get me. So why bother even trying to do anything about it? And it's this fear about long-term complications. It's hard to avoid. You see it in the press and in magazines and in newspapers and online all the time. All these scary things about kidney disease and ending up on dialysis and having a heart attack and trouble with your eyes and your feet, etc. Who wouldn't be freaked out? Now, to be truthful, a little bit of fear about diabetes is a good thing, right? I mean, we should be concerned about that long-term scary complications can happen, do happen to lots of folks, and you'd like to avoid it. Being a little bit of fear, being a little bit fearful can provide you with the energy you need to go, I better stay on track with diabetes and really pay attention to it. But the problem is if it's overwhelming, if there's too much fear, if you're too frightened, there's a tendency to say, I'm just going to put my head in the sand and just not think about diabetes at all. But this concern about long-term complications is real. But I want to present to you some of the real evidence we have, because we're very good at presenting evidence to people with diabetes that are scary. We forget that there's a lot of good news. And I want to anchor that because there's a whole body of research we're building up now. We call it evidence-based hope that most people don't know about. And if you heard our presentation last year where we talked about this, I presented really the same study. There's hundreds of these studies, but this is my favorite one that I think is really critical to begin to address how scary people feel about diabetes. This was a study that came from Sweden. In fact, here's what the front of that publication looked like. And they looked at a large group of people with type 2 diabetes in Sweden. In fact, they looked at everybody with type 2 diabetes in Sweden, which they can do because they had these really awesome national registries. And they said, let's look at these thousands and thousands of people. It's 250,000 people with type 2 diabetes. And let's compare them to a whole bunch of people, also in Sweden, who don't have type 2 diabetes. On average, these people were about age 60 or so. And they said, what happens to people over a period of, say, 5, 6, 7 years? And they looked at a bunch of things. We're going to talk about one of the things they looked at, which was heart attacks. How many of these people ended up having a first heart attack? So first of all, if we look at the people who didn't have type 2 diabetes over this 5 or 6 year period, the height of this tiny little blue column you see on the left side of your screen is kind of the percentage of people who had a heart attack. These are the percentage of people who didn't have type 2 diabetes. Then they compared that to the people who did have type 2 diabetes, and the percentage of them was a way higher bar. And you can see this suggests that people with type 2 diabetes are at a much higher risk, triple, quadruple the risk of having a heart attack compared to someone who doesn't have type 2 diabetes. And maybe you've been warned about this and heard this. If you have diabetes, you're at higher risk of having problems with your heart. This data would suggest to support that, except for one problem, which is I'm lying to you. Because that tall column there, that actually isn't people with type 2 diabetes in the study. It's a subset. It's the group of people with type 2 diabetes who had all 5 major risk factors. What are those? That means they had an elevated glucose level, they had an elevated A1C, they had elevated blood pressure, they had elevated levels of cholesterol, they had elevated what's called albumin levels or albuminuria, they had little bits of protein in their urine. Oh, and they were smokers. So yeah, you add all that together, super high risk of having a heart attack. But what about people with type 2 diabetes who had maybe fewer of those 5 risks? In fact, what about people who had none of them, who had their blood pressure, cholesterol, glucose control, albumin levels, and didn't smoke, and they all had them in a safe place? Well, their risk of having a heart attack over that same period of time is that little tiny bar you see on the far right of your screen. And if you compare their risk, the percentage of them, the risk of them having a heart attack, compared to people who don't have type 2 diabetes, you'll see it's really no big difference. In fact, statistically, I will tell you, the risk for people with type 2 diabetes who are in a safe place with their A1C, their blood pressure, lipids, and more, actually was statistically less than the people who didn't have diabetes. So there's lots of data like this that everybody needs to know about. And it tells us something important. Yeah, scary things happen to folks with type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes. Doesn't have to. Here's an important fact check. I don't mean to say that with good care, we can guarantee that you'll never develop complications. But all of our data that doesn't get talked about so much is that with good care and effort, odds are pretty good you can live a long and healthy life with diabetes. And that's what we want people to understand, to begin to address some of the fear that so many people feel, that particular kind of pressure. And to put it in the words of my very favorite physician from 100 years ago, Sir William Osler, he said it so well even then. He said, to live a long and healthy life, develop a chronic disease and take care of it. So think with yourself and think with your own healthcare providers about dealing with that pressure of all that fear that can happen. So that's one of the sources of that pressure. Another source is the shame and guilt that so many people feel. If you're not managing your diabetes well enough, somehow it's your fault, you should have been better, why can't you lose weight? You can put all that shame and guilt on yourself, or you may be feeling it from other people, from healthcare professionals, from family members, from everybody. And unfortunately, when you're feeling so full of shame, it doesn't tend to motivate you to want to take better care of your diabetes. It can be paralyzing. And you can just feel like, well, why bother doing anything? I'd just rather avoid even thinking about this. So it's important to know the truth. And the truth is, you didn't give yourself type 2 diabetes. It doesn't work that way. You need to have the right genes, and of course I put right in quotes because I wouldn't wish that on you, but you have to have the right genetic history, and you have to be living in the right environment, an environment that tends to increase your risk for being sedentary, to increase your likelihood of making poor dietary choices. And what's one good example of the quote-unquote right environment for type 2 diabetes? Well, one option would be living in the United States of America, where we tend to be relatively sedentary, especially if you live in an urban environment, and where the options and the seductive choices about what you might choose to eat, even if you're trying to follow a healthy approach, might be more limited than you might like. and that we are drawn to what is immediately attractive in a way that can be detrimental for any of us. So understand that there's ways of addressing this. And the most important way to think about it, to consider that is this. First of all, you want to make sure that your expectations of what you're trying to accomplish are possible, especially when you're living in a place like the United States. Your goal isn't to have perfect blood sugars or to eat health or eat perfectly. Your goal is to have a healthy, good enough. Now, what does that mean? It means talking with your healthcare providers about exactly what that might mean for you. And you want to have a really serious, good plan, a practical plan for how you might go about it. And that's going to be different from person to person. But not being perfect. What's a healthy, good enough like for you? Open up that conversation with your trusting healthcare professionals. That's what's critical. And also, get perspective. You need to be giving yourself credit for whatever efforts you're already making. You need to give yourself credit for even being here today and taking control of your diabetes. And however you're trying to do this, it may not be working as well as you want, but you're putting in some effort to do that. And there's other ways to do that that can help you to be even more successful. So that's the second source of pressure and some thoughts about what to do about it. The third is the sense of discouragement that can happen to so many people. How many times have I heard someone say something like this, for example? Oh, I did everything I was supposed to, and check this out, my blood sugars are still all over the place. Boy, that can suck the oomph right out of you when that happens. Here's another example. Check this out. I finally got my A1C down to a safe place, and now I'm having all these problems with low blood sugars. Ugh. This is incredibly difficult when you feel like you're putting out your best efforts, and it feels like you're almost getting punished for trying. That sense of discouragement is, again, a powerful sense of pressure that can lead you to want to give up. Here's one more example, to add. Said another one of my patients, check this out. So now I'm doing my medications just like my doctor told me to, and I've gained 10 pounds. Well, this sucks. Again, being punished, feeling like you're failing when you're trying now to put in more effort, that's incredibly discouraging. And by the way, we think about that last point, that's another good reason to then when you want to go back to your healthcare professional and say, wait a minute, am I on the right medications? Because we know many of our newer medications can help you to be successful to achieve good glucose control without promoting weight gain. That isn't true with many of our old medications, but our newer cool ones, that is true. So make sure you ask and inquire about this. So think about it. What are you hoping to achieve? Again, the goal is not to have perfect blood sugars, not to think you're going to ever be eating perfectly. None of us can achieve that. And the goal isn't really to, oh, if I can only get off all my medications, that means I've been successful. What does it even mean to actually be successful? Because this is the key to understanding how you can feel encouraged rather than discouraged. And the key is you want to reach a safe place with your diabetes numbers. That's what's key. So how do you ever know if you've been successful? You need to know about your numbers. What's your A1C? What's your blood pressure number? What's your cholesterol numbers? Do you know what those numbers are and what your target is? Here's an example of how we do it at the Behavioral Diabetes Institute. This is what we call our scorecard. This is Molly's scorecard. And you can see on the scorecard on the left side of the screen, all we're looking at three things: A1C, blood pressure, and lousy cholesterol, the LDL. The next column, you can see Molly's numbers, Molly's targets. And then the next column, where it says last results, you can see Molly's last numbers. So Molly's last A1C was 8.7%, her last blood pressure, 125/75, and her last lousy cholesterol, or LDL, was 116. So then you can see on the right side of the screen, Molly simply put a check mark, either in the green zone, if she's in a safe place with those numbers, or the red zone if she's not. So when Molly filled this out, she could see that, I'm not yet in the safe place with my A1C or my LDL cholesterol, but I'm there with my blood pressure. And this helped her to feel like, well, I'm at least part of the way there, and now I can begin to focus on one of these other things. So I don't have to eat perfectly, I don't have to do everything right, but it's important that I can focus on these numbers. So for Molly, For her, what was critical is to start with that A1C and to go back to her physician and say, 8.7 A1C, that's not okay. What can we do about this? And for Molly was having a discussion in particular about her medications. Actually, was she missing some of them? Was she on the right medication? What could help her to reach that point of success? And when she did that, that could really help her to feel better and to have that pressure begin to alleviate and go away. And the key to this, to deal with that discouragement, was not trying to do everything for Molly, but to focus on that one step. For her, it was about that her medications that she was taking to try to control her blood sugar levels. In other words, rather than trying to do everything, she was trying to do it one step at a time. That's what was key. So we talked about what are these really three tough emotions, really these three sources of pressure, whether it's, fear, shame and guilt, discouraged. And as I mentioned, there's more than three, but we're just focusing on these three that are really critical. And by recognizing how these can really lead to anybody with type 2 diabetes feeling overwhelmingly pressured and hopefully putting forward some ideas about how to address them, I hope this is helpful for you. And to consider also, in terms of other solutions, that all of our evidence shows if you're trying to manage diabetes effectively and deal with this sense of pressure, one of the keys that we've learned over the years is to don't do diabetes alone. Everyone's more successful, feeling better and maintaining more positive changes when you feel that you've got people in your life who are rooting for you. And remember also that if you're feeling under pressure, it's normal to feel under pressure about diabetes. Let's face it, most of us feel under pressure about life. So to feel that other additional pressure about diabetes, given what diabetes is like right now in terms of how we need to address it, it's understandable. But the good news is we know you can harness that pressure to work for you, not against you. And we do that by sniffing out what are the source of pressure for me? What is really critical? And then by making sure we have enough knowledge, the reason you're here at Taking Control of Your Diabetes Today, and by taking positive action, you can feel a whole lot better about life with diabetes. And that's the goal for everyone here, hopefully leaving here today feeling so much better and feeling excited about how you can be successful. Also, if you're interested, I hope you'll also remember that we have a TCOID research registry. And the registry, many of you already belong to it, so thank you very much, involves simply giving us permission when you sign up to potentially participate in online anonymous research surveys. It's only for adults with diabetes. We always pay you for your time, and you're helping others because we use the information we collect to develop publishable manuscripts that we share with healthcare professionals and scientists around the world so that we can better understand what folks with type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes are going through. So consider joining. You can do that simply by going to this website, tcoidregistry.org. And this, along with everything else we talked about today, can help us and can help you feel better and manage diabetes so much more effectively. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions and learning more from you throughout the day and the time in the future in TCOID. Thanks.